Great to have you with us. The headline kind of summarizes this. I'd like you to give us a little deeper drill down into it. The headline, a new Community Environmental Legal Defense Fund report details a standard operating procedure of how corporate interests and the politicians who serve them retain power. What is this all about, and what does it have to do with the environment?
Yeah, this was a report put together by a colleague, Simon Davis Cohen, who did quite a bit of research. And it's an attempt from our perspective to begin to show how so many of the single issues that are threatening our communities actually have very common roots within the Constitution and the powers that have been given to corporations. So I think, a lot of folks have heard and understand over the years that corporations sue communities to try to force in, fracking projects or pipelines, things like that. It may be less visible that corporations are also suing communities over a variety of other issues. So the report details how corporations in different states have sued when a community actually tries to raise the minimum wage. Corporations have sued when communities try to put into place paid sick leave provisions. When they try to put into place more affordable housing, they get sued by, conglomerations of landlords. So the intent behind the report is really to, number one, help folks see that in many ways it doesn't matter what the issue is. A variety of issues facing our communities all generally get the same response from corporations, which is corporations then use their constitutional powers to sue communities. They sue under what's called the Commerce and Contracts Clauses of the Constitution. I know you've written about things like that before, Tom, as well as they have constitutional rights that have been given to them by the Supreme Court over the years, that where corporations have First Amendment rights to free speech, where they get to spend money to influence local elections and state elections. They have Fourth Amendment rights to be free from unreasonable searches and seizures. And I could go through all of the different rights and protections that corporations have. But just to kind of sum up, the report is intended to really show that a lot of the different issues our communities are facing actually have deeper systemic roots, and that corporations have these powers and privileges and protections. And it's not just recent. It's actually been by design. In many ways, the corporate interests are using the system as it was designed by the 1%, and are now not only using the Constitution to protect themselves, they're actually actively weaponizing using the Constitution to beat our communities essentially over the head when we try to do what's in our best interest in the place where we live. The last thing I want to say is that it's not just the corporations that have these protections. They're also using these protections when our state and federal legislature legalize certain activities within the state. So there's preemptive laws where the states remove authority from communities to, say, raise the minimum wage. And then if a community tries to raise the minimum wage, then the corporation comes in and uses the power of the state law to actually tell the community they don't have the right to do what's in the best interest of the community members. Last thing is that we've also not just seen corporations suing. We now have seen attorney generals suing in different states on behalf of the corporate interests. So it's not just the corporations using their powers. It's actually our own elected attorney generals being paid by taxpayer dollars that are being essentially privatized as a security force to come in on behalf of the corporate interests and get the local laws out of the way.
Right, and in most cases, and maybe all cases, these attorney generals themselves have to stand for election and re-election, and so they need the support of the big corporations to be able to pay for their ads and all that other kind of crap. So we're talking with Chad Nicholson, Pennsylvania community organizer with CELDEF, the Community Environmental Legal Defense Fund, celdef.org. Chad, what do we do about this, and what are you guys doing about this?
Yeah, we've been working with communities, mostly at the local level over the last 15 or 20 years, to draft what we call community bills of rights. And it's not my organization going in and telling a community what they should be doing. It's really trying to listen to the needs of the community. So we've worked with communities to draft local laws that actually are about campaign finance reform, not waiting for things at the federal level. We've worked with a lot of communities to ban activities like factory farms, fracking, things like that. I think what's different about our work at the community level is it's about putting forward a positive vision for the community. So it's the community saying, hey, these are the things that we actually want to see. And then we work with them to ban the things that would violate and infringe on the community's rights and values. So it's about working with the community to actually pass these local laws. And then if they get challenged by a corporation or by the state, we then work with them to defend that challenge in court. But I think the bigger picture is that communities have to also understand their local law may not stand in the short term. And I think what we do about it is really a question for the people living in the communities and how far they're willing to go. So, for example, I was on the program a couple of years ago talking about Grant Township. Grant Township is a small rural municipality in Pennsylvania, about 700 people, been fighting off a frac waste injection well for the last 6 years at this point. They've been sued in federal court where the judge overturned their ordinance. Grant Township then said, actually, we're going to pass a new law. They passed what's called a home rule charter, overturned the judge's ruling, and they reinstated the ban. And at that point, they were sued in state court by the State Department of Environmental Protection. So it's not just the corporation suing, it's our actual State Department of Environmental Protection that is suing this community for trying to protect its environment. I can't say that enough times. But some interesting things have happened, and this is getting to your question, I think, of what to do about it, is Grant Township never just stayed on the defensive. They never just stood around and waited for these attacks from either the DEP or the corporation to come. They've continued to stay on offense and put into place new policies and procedures to keep the corporate state off balance. So, for example, when I was on the program last, Grant Township had actually passed a local law that legalized nonviolent direct action. Basically said, we don't expect the courts to rule in our favor. We don't think we're going to get any help from our state or federal legislatures or regulators. So we're going to actually have to defend and enforce and protect our rights ourselves if it comes to that, and actually legalize nonviolent direct action. So it's a way of continuing to keep corporations in the state off balance, say we're not going to just accept the traditional rules of engagement for, what we're told we can and can't do. We actually have to write a new script. We have to put into place new governing frameworks, and we have to really be creative and bold about how we're going to enforce these things. And actually, just to that point, a couple of months ago, in that same case, the DEP had sued Grant Township. They actually then reversed course after 2 years and revoked the permit for the injection well. We still don't know why, but just to say that all of the pressure that Grant Township has put on corporations and the state over the last several years has actually now resulted in a win. It was the first law that we're aware of in the United States, a local rights of nature law, where the state agency then actually used that law to deny a permit for an oil and gas corporation. Last thing,
was there a political change in the state, or do you think that that they were being shamed into it?
It's hard to say. I think the DEP is under a lot of pressure. It's getting increasingly difficult for them to defend permitting things like injection wells just because of how toxic the frac waste that goes in is. As well, DEP is under investigation right now by the Attorney General in Pennsylvania, as well as the FBI for some pipeline-related work that they were overseeing. And actually, just yesterday in Pennsylvania, the Attorney General came out with a report talking about the DEP's failures when it comes to regulating fracking over the past several years. So I think it's harder for them to defend their actions, both in terms of how they have failed to protect the environment, as well as that they are actively suing communities trying to stop what are clearly harmful activities. Last thing I want to say is, we've worked with dozens and dozens of communities across the country on various issues. We do think it does need to move to the state level at some point, but that there's not going to be real state or federal change until there's actually the grassroots effort. So we've now had constitutional amendments introduced in Pennsylvania, Ohio, Colorado, Oregon, and New Hampshire that are actually about giving communities the rights and protections they need to fight off these corporations and not constantly have to be on the defensive. So we're now working with these communities at the local level to build grassroots pressure for state and then federal constitutional change, which we think is where this ultimately needs to head.
Are you proposing, you just mentioned federal constitutional change, so your constitutional amendments are federal, or are you proposing to amend state constitutions as well?
State and federal. We're starting at the state level. And as I mentioned, we've got, I think there's 5 states that have had these constitutional amendments introduced at this point that we're now organizing around. And so the amendments are basically about the right of local community self-government, giving communities the rights and the powers and the authorities that they need to stop harmful activities, because that goes back to the whole point of the report. Right now, all these harmful activities, if the community tries to take action to protect themselves, they get sued. And so we have to, we basically have to rewrite in many ways parts of the Constitution and turn it on its head, because right now it is being used as a weapon. It's being used to protect the interests of the 1%, the elite, the wealthy, and the 99% of our communities don't actually get to use it. So that's what we're proposing, state constitutional amendments, and then we do have one for the federal level as well. But I think that's going to be a little ways off yet.
What does your federal constitutional amendment propose? We got about 20 seconds here, Chad.
Yeah, again, a right of local community self-government, that communities across this country should be able to pass laws that protect the rights of the people and the ecosystems within the community, and that those laws should be able to be free from state or federal preemptive laws, and that those laws should also not be subject to corporate interference and corporate harassment.